Let me turn the program over to our Speakers Bureau Chair, Sasha Vanoski. Sasha?
Thank you, Dick. As we know, Rotarians are by default very interesting people, not just by their professions, but also because of their passions and the way we choose to lead our lives. Our speaker today is a perfect example of a dedicated Rotarian and truly does not need my introduction. He has had a long and very successful career in the corporate world as an executive and as a business consultant. He always has some amazing stories about his experiences working with various businesses and how he managed to help them overcome difficult situations. Please welcome our own Richard Ungerer.
I'm going to talk to you today about establishing a peak performance in any economy. And so the purpose of this presentation is really to show you there are some brands that I've worked with in my past. Some of you know these brands. And it started with at Ford Motor Company in industrial engineering, designing engine plants. But then I went into the operations group. And these are some of my clients. I've been doing turnarounds since 1974, mostly though with large companies. My consulting company was started in 1997. And as you may have known, I've had many mentors in my career. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 mentors that I've had. But in terms of Rotary, and since I'm talking to Rotarians, I'm going to give it to you in terms of Rotary, of how I look at these mentors. Of course, the first is Dave Thomas. I worked with Dave for 9 years. At Wendy's, I was the Senior Vice President of Operations in the US, and I was Chairman of Wendy's of Canada. Dave Thomas subscribed to all of the 4-way tests. I've worked for this man for 9 years. I never heard him swear once. At our peak growth cycle in Wendy's, we were opening 500 restaurants a year. When I joined Wendy's, they had 900 stores. 9 years later, when I left, they had 5,000 stores. So that's Dave Thomas. To all of us in senior management, Dave was like our dad. And I absolutely love this man. One of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. I left Dave after 9 years, and I went to work for Wayne Huizenga. Wayne Huizenga at the time only had 900 video stores. In fact, he even told me during the interview that he didn't even have a VCR. But when I joined Wayne, he had 900 stores. In terms of the 4-way test, Wayne only subscribed to 3 of them. He wasn't crazy about is it fair to all concerned. And he also told me during my interview that if you don't come to work on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday. So working for Wayne was a 7-day job. During the years that I was at Blockbuster, we never opened less than 700 new stores a year. Wayne's attitude was very simple. His philosophy was hire the very best people and then get out of their way. And so that was an interesting time working with Wayne because he was such opposites of Dave, but both of them were total winners and they both believed in winning. Then I left Wayne and I went to work for Howard Schultz. And at the time I worked for Howard, he only had 9 stores in the Washington, D.C. area. Like Dave Thomas, Howard was the soul of the company. In 1993, he only had 250 stores in the whole company at Starbucks. He only had 9 in Washington, D.C. Since I had food experience, retail experience, and exponential growth, he wanted me to develop the East Coast for him. Well, in 1993, the year before I joined Starbucks, in 1993, Starbucks opened 100 stores all year. As a point of reference, the last month that I was at Blockbuster, we opened 125 Blockbusters in a month in November. So when I got to Starbucks, obviously I wanted to grow faster than he had even envisioned. And I ended up opening 150 stores in 19 months. But today I'm going to talk to you about 3 things. And in any economy, especially during a recession, these are the 3 areas of focus that allow you to grow stronger and always stronger than your competitors. And just because there's a soft economy doesn't mean you have to participate. And these 3 areas are always critical and have been critical in each of my assignments. Obviously, when you get involved with a company, you have to observe the company like everybody else does. You got to look at it from the customer's perspective. But to be really effective as a turnaround consultant, you got to get behind the scenes. You got to focus immediately from the company from behind, the part that the customer never sees, because you'll quickly see what's causing the lack of peak performance. And by the way, it's always people. And again, the first thing we're going to talk about is people. And I will tell you that in any kind of economy, regardless of your competition, your people are always your number one reason that's causing your issue and causing how to fix it. So for those of you that are involved in companies or want to know more about this people thing, we're going to take a little deeper dive into it. But first, I have to ask you, does your company have a mission statement? Have you published your core values? And if you have published your core values are things that all are about, this is who we are. This is how we operate all the time. Your core values represent how you treat your employees, how you treat your vendors, and how you treat your customers. Because core values are core values of your company. So having said all that, what percentage of your employees embody your core values? Next question is, how do you explain to those employees why you tolerate the other employees? So having said all that, let's look at the people side of the business. Okay, it's all about attitude. Okay, the attitude of your senior managers, the people that report to the CEO. It's the attitude of your frontline people. Those are what I call your internal customers, shown in yellow. Your external customer is your current customers and your past customers. So when I talk about people, I'm talking about the internal customer and the external customer. A lot of people will tell you that your number one asset are your people. And I'm here to tell you, in all of the years that I've been doing turnarounds, that's absolutely not true. Your number one asset are not your people. Your number one asset are the right people. And so you have to identify in your senior group and your frontline people, who are the right people? Who are those people that embody the core values and the mission statement? If they've got the attitude, okay, those are people that I call the right people. The next thing you got to do is you got to identify all of those right people, and you got to identify that they're in jobs that amplify their strengths, not their weaknesses, because a lot of times they're in the wrong job. And so moving those people where their strengths are amplified. For example, if you have somebody that's not very statistical and you put them in a job where statistics is really important, they're not going to be successful. But if you put them in a job where their strengths are amplified, they will blossom. And you will take people that have the right attitude and you'll put them in jobs where they can be successful, and you'll turn those people's performance around almost immediately by having them in jobs where their strengths are amplified and their weaknesses are diminished. The next thing you want to do is you want to identify your teams that are working well, and you want to identify the teams that are not working well, and you want to act accordingly to make those changes. But throughout this entire process, when it relates to people, always keep your top performers. Those are the people you're going to fix the company with, and those are people that are critical to helping you get out of where you are. And you want to hire to replace those low performers. In an economy like we've got today, everybody should be able to identify easily the low performers. And right now, you should be taking those low performers, moving them out of your company and bringing in some talent, because there's a lot of good talent on the sidelines right now. And these people that are your low performers, they're taking up a very valuable spot for you. So bring in the right talent, upgrade your people, particularly during a recession. And when you come out of this recession, you'll come out a lot stronger as it relates to people. The next thing on the dimension of people is I tell all of my clients, and again, I only work with big companies usually, but what I always tell them was, I want you to focus on building advocacy, okay? And we'll get into the advocacy in a few seconds with another topic. I want, in everything about people, it's leadership. And leadership is simply getting people to voluntarily follow you because of your judgment, because of your wisdom, and because of your personal appeal or your proven competency. But anyway, leadership is something where people voluntarily follow you. And true leaders, remember, they create leaders, not followers. Dictators create followers. True leaders create leaders. And you can't grow unless you are growing your future leaders of tomorrow in the organization. We fight this now even within Rotary. We're looking for future leaders within our club. We've got to take people that are going to potentially down the road become leaders of our club, and we've got to nurture those people, and we got to move them along and get them into those positions of leadership. The same thing is true with companies. So that's it relates to people. That's the first. Now, here's the problems. And again, every single client I've worked with, I don't care who it was, how big they are, these are the items that you have to focus on in terms of problems. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I am going to go through them one at a time. Cash flow burn, how fast are you burning cash? Can you sustain yourself? Quality of your revenue, your productive assets and your non-productive assets. We're going to talk about human capital. One of the things that makes my consulting company different from other consulting companies, we focus on human capital, not just capital assets. The leadership, as well as symptoms and problems, which is another exercise that we focus on with all of our clients. Talk about cash flow first. You got to have an adequate cash flow to sustain yourself. You can't burn cash faster than you're using it. That's going to have an unhappy ending. You got to have methods of being able to fill that gap. I will tell you, for example, Pillsbury. When Pillsbury ended up buying Green Giant, they found out that they had an earnings problem in the summertime because frozen foods was really solid in the wintertime, but it was slow in the summertime. So they ended up buying Burger King because the restaurant group peaked in the summertime. And the only reason Pillsbury did that was the same reason General Mills bought Burger Chef, because they wanted to equalize their earnings and fill that gap of cash throughout the year. You can look at selling some assets. You can look at your receivables, particularly your aging receivables, your inventory turns. We'll talk about that in a second. Slow moving inventory. I will tell you that sometimes I've been with clients where their slow moving inventory was so slow that I used to call them physical assets. They weren't really inventory. Building sales is secondary to the objective. And of course, working capital, it's got to be a positive working capital. In other words, your current assets have to be greater than your current liabilities. The quality of your revenue is one thing we do with all of our clients in the very beginning. We want you to take your existing customers and we want you to assess the margin that they give you. And you've got to take your existing customers and elevate them to advocates. I almost always recommend to every client, and we'll talk about it in a second more in detail, but let's focus on your existing customers as opposed to getting new customers. Because your new customers, they require an additional investment. They don't know who you are. They don't know anything about you. But your existing customers and your past customers, they do. They know who you are. They know a little bit about you. Why not take that new advertising dollars you were spending towards new customers and redirect it immediately to some of your existing and your past customers to get them to become an advocate for you, where they recommend you to other people. That's the key to getting people to start turning around and being able to do that. And lastly, take your profit contribution and let's do it by customer. And then we also do it by product line too, to try to identify the quality of your revenue. Productive assets is pretty common thing. We rank your assets by their profit contribution. Do you need capital investment? Do you need debt financing, or can we do some debt financing, or do we have to do equity financing, which is something we don't really recommend, equity financing, because we don't want to see our clients dilute or bring in ownership changes. And please don't forget the human assets. We're going to talk about that in a second. Those are your productive assets. Here's your non-productive assets. We rank them again by profit contribution. Some cases, it's easier to get rid of them. Can some of the assets be sold? Can we deploy some of them so they can become productive assets? We look at the sales impact. So if we got rid of that asset, how would it affect sales? And once again, don't forget the human non-productive assets. Those are the people that I refer to as the dead wood. Those are the people that aren't performing. You got to be replacing those people. Don't let them take up valuable slots for two reasons. Number one, they're taking up a valuable slot, but number two is you have to take and every day face the right people and explain to them why you keep the non-right people around. So that's important on non-productive assets. Okay, human assets. This is what makes my company unique to other companies that we've been up against when we're dealing with clients, because only the right people are your best assets. And you have to remember, those people, the right people, they come with brains at no extra cost to the company. I can't say that for the wrong people, but for the right people, you got to recognize they come with brains at no extra cost, and you got to ask them to use that. You have to align your incentives with your shareholder. I did a turnaround one time on a $3 billion company, and we took our bonus program and we changed it so that anybody that came up with an idea that saved us money, we would annualize it, and whoever gave us that idea, they got 2% of the annual savings in a bonus check. And we had one person that was a little bit above minimum wage in the company. This is a $3 billion company. This person was just above minimum wage. They made almost $300,000 in a bonus because that's how much money the company saved annually. And that was only 2% of what the annual savings was for the idea that that employee came up with. So get your incentives aligned with your shareholder and continually upgrade your staff. I know you're hearing that over and over again because that's what's critical, is to continue to upgrade your staff. Okay, leadership. Here we are, back to leadership again. Leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. Winning in an organization is contagious. And for those of you that know where this is going, so is losing. So if you have an organization that's used to losing, you've got to teach them how to win. And that is a separate subject for a different day. I got another presentation on getting your organization to become winners and to making winning, get your small wins. You have to inspire your people because they got to believe in you as a leader. And you got to connect your people, remember, with that mission statement and your core values. And you have to focus on problems, not on symptoms. Now, here's an exercise that I give clients. And when you're talking to a $1 billion organization, sometimes there's a tendency to believe you don't need to do this basic stuff, but I do because it always is needed in an organization. Okay, here's the symptoms, or here's the items. Your sales are down, your costs are increasing, your transactions are down, your profits are down. You got departments that are really not working together. You may work for a company like this, or you may own a company like this, or you may have used to work for a company like this. All of these things, folks, are really not problems. These are symptoms. Now, if I said to you your roof is leaking and you've got two approaches, you can put 13 buckets on the floor to catch the water, which addresses the symptom, or you can fix the roof, which addresses the problem. Everybody understands that, but they don't understand this. These are symptoms, they're not problems. And most companies, when we engage with them, they're looking at these things as problems, and you can't. Here's your problems, and you only have 3 of them. There's only 3 possible problems you can have in a company. Whether you're 5 billion or whether you're doing 50 million in revenue or you're doing 2 million in revenue. Number 1, you don't have enough people. That's usually easy to see. Number 2, they're not the right people. That's usually the issue. And then number 3, they're thoroughly not trained. So as a leader and as a manager of an organization, you end up spending most of your time on number 2 and number 3, because it's pretty easy to identify number 1. Okay, those are your problems. If you fix these 3 problems, those symptoms will go away. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about something a little bit more, not quite so obvious. Positioning. And I'm going to give you some examples here for you to identify with. Everybody remembers Charles Lindbergh. He was the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic. He did it in 1927. He flew from New York to Paris, and he did it in 33.5 hours. Do you know who the second person was? His name was Bert Hinkler, and he did it in 1930. And he did it in less time than Lindbergh, and he used less fuel than Lindbergh. But nobody ever heard of Bert Hinkler. Why? Because he was number 2. Number 3 was Amelia Earhart. She flew solo in 1932, and she did it in less than 15 hours. You heard about her because she was the first woman. You got to be first. So when it comes to positioning, you got to have passionate people, passionate products, and a passionate process. And you have to be number 1 in a category, even if you have to create a new category. Okay? We're going to get involved in another example here is you got to have a point of difference, and it's got to be brutally honest. If I said to you that I owned a Jaguar and I didn't have any problems with it, you would probably say, well, you're pretty lucky. But if I said I owned a Honda and I had all kinds of problems with it, you would say, gee, that's really rare, because the consumer's perception is what's real. So if Jaguar wanted to say we're the most trusted car being made, people wouldn't believe that. But the point is, you've got to be brutally honest in your competitive reconnaissance, and you've got to be able to know what is your competitive advantage. And I will tell you this, for as long as I've been a consultant, no matter how big the client, I always ask them on the first interview to the CEO, I always ask them, what is your point of difference? And I can tell you since 1997, I have never had a CEO answer this question correctly, because they always tell me what they believe is the point of difference. I don't care what they believe. I only care what the consumer believes is the point of difference. You have to create a competitive advantage, something your competitors are likely not to do, and then it's got to be relevant to the beliefs of your clients and to your customers. And I'm going to give you some example here, one example right now. Here's competitive disadvantage, Wendy's. Wendy's started, and when he started, they told Dave Thomas there's no room for another hamburger chain. There was Burger King, there was Hardee's, there was McDonald's, there was no room for another hamburger chain. Well, fortunately, Dave didn't believe him. And Dave created old-fashioned hamburgers, which nobody else had. Dave put in square hamburgers instead of round because he was using fresh meat. And he also used to say, jokingly, but he always did say this, the reason our hamburgers are square is because at Wendy's we don't cut corners. Then we created chili meat, and we did it for one reason. The only way to make sure and guarantee that every guest gets a fresh hamburger that's not overcooked was to have chili, because no manager in their right mind wanted to put fresh meat on the grill for chili meat. They needed that meat. So if it was on the grill and there was no customer, they took that hamburger off the grill and they put it in the chili bin so we could make chili with it, because that's the purpose of chili, was to guarantee we had fresh hamburgers to serve every guest every day. We had a pickup window. Other hamburger chains in the beginning didn't have a pickup window. And here's one of the things that made Wendy's unique. One of the ways that hamburger chains and restaurants look at themselves is they look at their first year sales against the investment. Now, when I left Wendy's in 1990 after 9 years, McDonald's had a sales to investment ratio of 1.25. That meant that their sales for their first year was 25% greater than the investment. So they had an investment ratio of 1.25. Burger King was 0.9. Hardee's was 1. Wendy's was 2.5 to 1. Wendy's was double McDonald's. Reason? Because Wendy's had pickup windows on all of their stores. That meant that Wendy's had 60% of their volume that didn't need a parking spot. Now you could have a smaller parking lot. 60% of their volume went through the drive-thru, so they didn't need a table and a chair, so you could have smaller dining rooms. So a Wendy's had a smaller building and a smaller investment and had higher revenue because 60% of the volume went through the pickup window. That's what gave Wendy's such an incredible sales to investment ratio. And for those of you that might not remember, Blockbuster's sales to investment ratio was 8-1. And that's when I left Wendy's, I went to Blockbuster. That's why we started opening 700 stores a year. So anyways, the pickup window was another point of difference that we knew we had an advantage on. Then we did the salad bar. Okay, nobody at the time in the early 70s had a salad bar. Wendy's put in the salad bar. In order to do the salad bar though, the reason was because Dave Thomas wanted whole leaf lettuce on the sandwiches, never processed lettuce, always whole leaf lettuce. So every morning at Wendy's, we took whole heads of lettuce, cut them in half, took the outer leaves and used enough and prepared enough to get through lunch. And then we were throwing away half of the head of lettuce. So we created salad bars so we could use that lettuce up. And then no matter how big you are, the one thing you always want to do as a company is you want to be flexible to be able to move on a dime for positioning. And Wendy's did that. And thank God for the 1980 election, and thank God for Walter Mondale, because when he coined Ronald Reagan as "Where's the beef?" Wendy's took it and made an advertising campaign out of it of "Where's the beef?" That's versatility. That's flexibility. That's moving on a dime. So if you want to be flexible, you've got to be able to do that. And with that, Dick, I now open it up for questions of anybody that has any questions you want to ask. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Rich. That was a great array of insights. We have a question from Roger Phillips. Roger, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Rich, how did you deal with egocentric CEOs? They are the big cheese and they're never wrong. How did you deal with that?
We have a lot of what I call one-on-one come to Jesus talks. We sit there, and what we do, Roger, is I start off with the CEOs, and some of my past partners are on this call, so Don Harris and Mark Storms can justify what I'm going to tell you. But basically, we sit with the CEO privately, and we let them know that we weren't the one that got the company into the ditch. Our job is to help them get out of the ditch. And we always tell the CEO one thing, what do you call it? Resisting change is like holding your breath. Even if you're successful, it doesn't end well. So we always teach them, if you're going to work with us, do not fight change. We're here to make change. But anyway, sometimes those egos really do get in the way. I had a couple of times with a CEO that I had to have some one-on-one sessions with him. And I went to a board meeting one time. We'd been engaged for 6 months. And one of the board members spoke up at a board meeting and said, "I cannot believe the change in the CEO since you've been engaged." And the CEO said to the board, "Well, I had the benefit of a couple come to Jesus conversations with Rich one-on-one." So.
Okay. Thanks, Rich. Our next question is from Jim Saul. Jim, can you ask your question?
Rich, I just wanted to mention to you that as a youth working at Wendy's, it was a great place to work, and then able to open up the first salad bar for that company when I was a young kid. And it just was inspiring to see that Dave Thomas was involved in so many different aspects. And it was great to understand that you had a lot of things that to move that company along, and I appreciate that. It was a great experience as a youth.
Thank you. I have a lot of Dave stories to tell, as most of the people that worked at Wendy's do. So thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Jim and Rich. Our next question is from Wayne Allen.
But I guess from an experience aspect, you mentioned you had a lot of experience working with bigger companies. Do you have success stories of working with small business companies as well?
The reason why I work with large companies is because I've been a CEO of a small company and I've been a CEO of a public company. And the reason I prefer large companies is because the chief financial officer is in a smaller company, that CFO is really more of a controller. And a good controller can tell you where you are and where you've been. but only a CFO can tell you where you're going. And the reason I prefer larger companies is because I need that CEO with me, the CFO with me, because I need that CFO to give me the chart and the course of where are we going? How do we get there? And you just don't find that in a smaller company in a controller.
Sophia Rodriguez, you have a question.
As an aspiring business student, are there anything like that any advice that you can give me that can best propel me like on the next step of my journey?
I would say, Sophia, when you get out of school or even when you're in your junior and senior year, is to start working for a company that's in the industry you'd like to be in. And it doesn't matter how much you get paid, because after you graduate, you will have 2 years experience under your belt, and you'll have a real advantage to be in any company to be able to move up in the organization. I would also tell you this, in all of my time working in companies, I have never turned down an offer. Anytime the company's offered me something, even if I didn't agree with it, I knew that my boss felt that I could do it. And I just simply always said yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm definitely I'm looking forward to the business world and definitely looking into many options. So trying to meet the right people to get me there, that would be awesome. That's awesome. And I love this organization so much. So for that.
Thank you. Thanks for coming too.
Thank you. Our next question is from Catherine Simmons. Catherine?
Hello, and great presentation, Rich. I have a lot of respect for you always, and you just did a really wonderful job today, which is no surprise. I wrote my question in the chat, and I'm not really, I know it's really a broad question and you don't have a crystal ball, but I was just curious if you were working with those companies you're working with before, or many of the larger companies now who are getting caught up in the cancel culture and all of this, all of these social issues, where you might have a company whose mission, product, services don't have anything to do with social issues in particular, but yet it just seems like there's a lot of strife, that gets created or time and energy spent within companies which maybe are already, lean on staff. And all of a sudden, all this attention and focus goes toward all of these social issues and conflicts and things of that nature. How would you navigate that right now if you were in those positions?
I think that's a great question, and it's a great observation. I guess my focus has been with clients all the time is to focus on your customer and to focus on your existing customers and your past customers and keep talking to them and find out what they like about you, what they don't like about you, but become obsessed with satisfying your customers and making your customers advocates, and focus on your services and try not to get too distracted from the other things that are important. But today social media is a method, frankly, companies are using to do instead of advertising, because it just doesn't pay anymore to advertise, for example, on the Super Bowl as a great example. But I think stay focused on your customer and stay obsessed with it. But it's those core values in the organization that's got to go to everybody in the organization. Everybody's got to be part of the core values, and they got to believe in it.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Our next question is from Bryant Santana. Bryant?
Hey guys, hope everyone can hear me. And thank you again so much for your presentation, Rich. A couple of my questions and key points I wanted to touch base upon was, I work for a company that's about 150 in size, and I really want to understand what would an approach be for an entry level employee. If there's for example, a new CFO that wants to bring in new ideas, because we've noticed that retention rates have somewhat gone down with employees finding better opportunities. But if I in order to kind of have that conversation with someone like a CFO and looking at things like working remotely internationally, how would you bring that up, and considering that we don't ever meet in person, it's all done virtually on the internet, you know what I'm
Sure. Brian, I'll tell you, you just reminded me of something that happened. I had a CEO one time. It was $1 billion organization in the aerospace industry. And I was with the board and the CEO. And the CEO said to me, "You're telling me that I've got to spend money training people, And every time I historically spend money training people, I lose them. Our competitors steal them. And so that's what you're telling me. And I sat there, I looked at the board, no one said anything. And so I said to the CEO, apparently I'm the only one in the room that knows what I heard. So what I heard you say was you don't want to spend time and investment of training people because your competitors are just going to steal them. And the CEO said, that's exactly what I said. I said, okay, so now I've heard you. So let me ask you the alternate question. What happens if you don't train them and they stay? Sometimes in a C-level or someone that's in a senior management has lost focus of what the objective is. And that is you got to teach your people to become the very best. And then you got to treat them so well that they would never think of leaving you. And I mean, I had plenty of opportunities to leave Dave Thomas when I was at Wendy's, but I never would have done that because he was like my dad. And I had plenty of opportunities for even more money. I mean, even when I met Wayne Huizenga, I met him a year earlier, and Wayne offered me, you know, just tons of money to be able to work for him, and I told him no. And it wasn't until a year later when Dave told me, Rich, you should do it because it's in Fort Lauderdale, and I live in Fort Lauderdale, and I'll see you more in Fort Lauderdale than I see you now at Wendy's. And that's the reason I went to Blockbusters, because Dave told me you should do it. So
Okay, thank you, Rich. Our next question is from Denny Creer. Denny?
Tell them the story when you went to Atlanta and what the reputation of Wendy's was and what your competitors did when they found out you were leaving.
And Dave Thomas asked me to take over part of the US. So I told him, I live in Ohio. My office is in Toronto. So I'll take the Southeast. So I went to Atlanta, and this was in 1988. And Wendy's was really having a difficult time in 1988. And Wendy's subscribed to this external thing called Market Track. Market Track was done every quarter. It was done to all the top hamburger chains in the country. And I'm reading this, in that quarter, in Atlanta, Wendy's had 125 restaurants. And that quarter, they were the slowest, the dirtiest, the rudest, and gave the least accurate orders out of any of the hamburger chains in Atlanta. Now, when I took this job, Dave knew this, and I didn't know that. And so I realized this is my toughest assignment. 2 years later, when I left to go to Blockbuster, in 1990, I left. The Burger King franchisees in Atlanta came into the Wendy's office and presented me a plaque and said, on behalf of all the Burger King franchisees in Atlanta, we're delighted you're leaving Wendy's. Because in each of those categories, Wendy's was either #1 or tied for #1 in every one of those categories.
Rich, I have a question for you.
Yes.
For 2 questions. How did you motivate the lower level employees then? And would it be more difficult to motivate them now?
That's a great question. And I will tell you that it would not be more difficult. In fact, right now, it'd even be easier. Instead of worrying about the noise and what's going on, let's talk about your company. Let's talk about your department. What are the things your department is doing right? What are the things about what your department's doing wrong? Because it's easy to throw stones at other departments and you ignore your contribution to the company moving in the wrong direction. So it's really focus to your own area of responsibility and sort of ignore all the rest of that noise.
And to motivate the young people that are like joining the company, what kind of incentives did you provide to keep them loving the company as much as you do?
Well, simply, I will tell you today, it's even easier because in most organizations, when you're new and you're a new consultant or you're new in management or you're new in leadership, you have a tendency to want to motivate people. Well, I've learned in big companies, you can't do that. You can't motivate people because everybody's motivated by something different. Some people are motivated by recognition. Some people are motivated by money for a little while. Some people are motivated by their position or their responsibilities or whatever. So here's what you have to do. You've got to eliminate the things that are demotivators. That's what everybody else in common. And so before you can do anything, you've got to eliminate, first of all, I don't feel valued. I don't feel my opinion matters. Those are demotivators. I don't feel like my boss listens to me. I don't feel like the company really cares. I don't feel that the company really believes in the core values because they treat me this way and they treat customers this way. And so those things are demotivators. And the first thing you've got to do is to get in there and eliminate those things. You've got to do that. Otherwise, they won't believe you. when you tell them you're going to do something. So instead of we're focusing on the motivators, you got to focus on the things that demotivate people and eliminate them. Yeah, George.
A lot of the things you talked about, I think, can apply to Rotary, and I'm sure that's what the thinking is that is going into the strategic plan. I think it's long overdue for Rotarians to look at Rotary and saying, where are we and where do we need to be going? I think this is going to be a great input.
Absolutely.
And thanks for your presentation.
My pleasure, George.
And on behalf of everyone, thank you for a great presentation, key insights, and really marvelous presentation. We are a business club, so remember, do business with Rotarians. As you saw Rich start his slide, the four-way test is a significant part of business success. So let's do the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Is it fun?
So be safe, be well, be involved, be a Rotarian. And our meeting is adjourned.